Welcome and good afternoon. This is Kamish Orr. Today we're going to do a little recap of the best of the 1930s tournament that I just finished. You can go watch actually the World Series of that tournament. As you can see, it went 7 games, and the 1931 Philadelphia Athletics won it all to become champion of the 1930s. But I thought I'd do a little recap since I didn't really delve into too much of the stats and stuff, and maybe some surprises along the way, and anything I've learned going through this process for this tournament, because I plan to do several more in the future. So why did I start with the 1930s? Well, so I think this is a great picture. This is from the 1937 All-Star game, I believe, and just I mean, just some Hall of Fame names here, and so I was really looking forward to seeing these guys compete, especially because I'm not as familiar with 1930s style of baseball, as I'm sure many of us probably aren't as familiar with 1930s style of baseball, which is, I mean, they're quite a bit different, I'd say, especially with pitcher usage and such. But look at this. Look at this. The other thing that surprises me about this photo is look how big Hank Greenberg is. I mean, maybe it's perspective because he's standing a little bit in front of the others if you line them up. But doesn't he just looks like he's a full head taller than everybody else, doesn't he? Something that I've always kind of found interesting about this photo. In any event, so I wrapped up the best of the 1930s tournament, and it was a double elimination. Most of the series were best of five, and so up until the league championship series, those were best of. Well, those were best of five also. I was going to have the World Series be best of seven, and I did do a best of seven here with this one between the 35 Cubs and the 31 Cardinals, because it was a do or die to get to the World Series. So that one I did a best of seven. But all the other series were best of five to get to this World Series. And so that's kind of how I did it. Would I do it differently? I think it worked out actually pretty well. And each one had a play-in series, if you will, because I wanted to take the top 5 teams from the American and National League from those decades, from this particular decade, for example. And so 4 and 5 seed played off against each other to get into the top 4, if you will, the top 4 bracket, and then from there on continued. And these, I've talked about this before, but these seeds were determined by the ELO ratings, which you can do a Google search and find the list of top teams by ELO rating. It basically is a rating system that takes not only of course, takes care of wins and losses throughout a season, but also the level of opponent that you're playing and the score and stuff like that. So it's kind of I think it originated in the chess world, and it was brought over to baseball to kind of determine who the really great teams were. Were they great because they beat up on a bunch of not so good teams, or were they great because they were still good even against the top teams? And so the ELO rating kind of takes that into account. And according to that rating system, the best team in Major League Baseball history is the 1939 New York Yankees. And they were in this tournament, which was another cool thing. Not only that, but we got Ted Williams, I believe his rookie year, 1939. And so we got him in here too. Of course, the Yankees did not fare as well as I was expecting. They got swept by the Washington Senators or Nationals in their first round here. And then they swept Detroit down in the losers bracket, but then Washington beat them again in the next round here. So, I mean, they only managed one win against Washington in 7 games. So, they didn't deserve to move on by any means, but I was expecting them to do a little bit better. In any event, I think Philadelphia is a great team too, especially with their lineup. But let's take a look at some of the stats. By the way, if you head over to baseballmaelstrom.com, you'll get to a homepage that looks like this, and it has all of my projects on it. And if you click on Best of the 30s tournament in this case, you can get to the Best of the 30s tournament page. I do a little write-up on every game I play, so you can go back and read all of the write-ups for all of these games. And then you can click on the stats button to get to the stats, which is what we're going to take a look here right now. Let me zoom this in so you can actually see it. So if we take a look at the stats, we can see that Philadelphia, of course, they didn't all play the same number of games here because of the tournament, the way the tournament was lined up. But Philadelphia ended up 13-8 throughout the whole tournament. They had a .313 batting average, team batting average in those games, which was well higher than anybody else. Boston Red Sox were second with a .296 average. 1930s baseball, for the most part, I think if you think about it, it is typically known for offense, and I saw that a little bit, but we still had some teams that didn't, that hit for lower average. And then ERAs, Philadelphia didn't have the best ERA by far. The Yankees and the Red Sox actually had better ERA. Of course, those were in 5 and 10 games, as compared to 21 games with Philadelphia. So again, if we're looking at the stats, we want to not take a look so much at the counting stats because, of course, those are going to be higher for Philadelphia, but more so the rate stats, I would say. So looking at on base percentage, for example, Philadelphia way above everybody else in on base, 386, and slugging, 467 slugging. Again, you can't put too much into the counting stats here, but in, let's say, Boston, 5 games, they hit 3 homers in 5 games. The Yankees hit 8 homers in 10 games. Philadelphia hit 14 in 11 games, in 21 games. But so many doubles and triples, for that matter. And they walked more than they struck out also, which, a lot of these teams did. The Yankees, Washington, they both walked a little bit more than they struck out. Not a lot of stolen bases overall. And again, I don't know if that's so much the 1930 style of play or these teams in particular. I kind of looked through, and there weren't really any teams that had high stolen base totals of these teams. So it's not too surprising. I did use Auto Manager throughout the series, and I stuck strictly to the Auto Manager, except in the World Series. I made a couple of changes with bringing in pitchers when the Auto Manager wouldn't have called for it. But other than that, I stuck the Auto Manager for stolen bases and sacrifice hits. We didn't have a lot of sacrifice hits. There is a new updated rule for season ticket baseball, actually, that may bump those numbers up for some of these older eras, but I did not utilize that through the tournament since the rule came out kind of mid-tournament. Again, pitching, best ERA was the Yankees, 3.52, but base runners per 9 innings, you can see Detroit was not great. It's almost a 7 ERA. They're allowing almost 17.5 base runners per 9 innings. Just not very good, which is why they didn't last long. Boston never allowed a home run in their 5 games. And, again, save totals are way down if you look at this. That's one thing. 1930s, most of the pitchers had a good number of complete games. And pitchers tended to stay in unless they were really getting shelled. They tended to stay in, much longer than nowadays overall, which is probably why you don't see as many saves. And we'll see kind of some of the pitching stats, individual pitching stats here in a minute. If we go to the National League, Cardinals, of course, batting average of .314, about the same as the Athletics. ERA was a little bit higher. Of course, a couple of those games were because they just got obliterated in a couple games by the Athletics. So 4.21 ERA. They went the distance in almost every series. They did sweep. Trying to think of who it was. I guess I could go back and look, couldn't I? Let's do that. You're going to see it very zoomed in here for a minute. So they did sweep the Giants here in this round. But other than that, every other series they were in went the full distance. They beat the Giants 3-2 games here. They lost to the Cubs 3-2 games here. Swept the Giants, beat the Cubs 3-2 and 4-3, and then took this series the distance when it looked like they were going to be out of it because Philadelphia was up 3-1 at one point. So very interesting, gritty team as we would say. Much better at home than on the road. And if we look at some of their other batting stats, we see a 350 on base, which isn't extraordinary. It's kind of middle of the pack. As a team, they struck out way more than they walked, and slugging a 454, which again it's better than average, but there were, the Giants were better than that. The Giants were right there with him offensively, if we look at it. They did have a couple of standout stars, I guess, on the team. Opponents hit 290 against them. So that again, some of that was due to the World Series and a couple of blowout games that Philadelphia had. If we head over to the leaders, and again, some of the counting stats, we need to just keep in mind that they're going to be dominated by the teams that played more games. But some of these rate stats, look at this. Al Simmons hit almost 500 in the tournament, 493. Chick Hafey from St. Louis, 444. He was the best in the National League. Selkirk for New York hit 439. Boston's Jimmy Fox hit 421. The Jimmy Fox that played for Philadelphia he was hitting like 2-something. Not nearly as good. Mel Ott had dominated in slugging, 936. But you have Chick Hafey right there, 767. Al Simmons, of course, 532 on base, which isn't surprising because his average is almost 500. And then if we just take a look here, again, Hafey had more games played than anybody. And so it's not surprising he'd lead in home runs with 8. But Mel Ott had 7. They didn't play nearly as many games. So, again, counting stats you kind of have to take with a grain of salt because St. Louis played so many more games because of the tournament. Let's see if anything else jumps out at me. Nothing on this jumps out. Ripper Collins grounded into 10 double plays, though. Look at all those double plays the Cardinals grounded into. Again, they played more games than anybody, but they grounded into a lot of double plays. And if we head back to take a look at the pitching leaders, again, Pittsburgh only played one series, so it's not surprising. Roy Mahaffey, though, for Philadelphia, 1.66 ERA. He wasn't one of their top 3 starters. I think he was the number 4 starter, maybe. So he didn't have quite as many starts as, let's say, Lefty Grove, but when he did, he was pretty dominant. St. Louis's Syl Johnson, 3.04 ERA. He dominated for most of his starts. So that's why we see that there. But if, let's see, opponents, I like to look at base runners per 9 innings here. And, here's Syl Johnson, less than 10. Lefty Grove had 4 losses, which is kind of surprising to me. Let's see, games started, yeah. I was going to take a look at some of these teams individually. And let me go back to the teams page. There we go. Philadelphia. So here we go. Al Simmons hit 493, Mickey Cochran 416, Jimmy Dykes 382. These are their starters. Mulehaus 367, Dib Williams 316. Jimmy Fox hit 226, but he had some key hits there in a couple of games in the World Series, as did Eric McNair, who only hit 154 over the full tournament, but he came through clutch a couple of the games in the World Series. Pitching, and I guess this isn't going to give us complete games, but you can kind of see throughout the whole tournament we only had, a handful of innings pitched by relievers. We had 4 innings by Lou Krause, a couple innings by Bill Shores. Hank McDonald was a reliever for his 10 2/3 before he got injured. Wade Hoyt, 5 innings. Rommel, 8 1/3. Those were the relievers, but not a lot of innings pitched from the relievers. As we'll just take a look here. Lefty Grove. I mean, look at those innings pitched. Look at those innings pitched. 9 2/3, 9 2/3, 8, 9, 8. So Grove was just in there for the distance, which is pretty true to real life. Same with if we go to Earnshaw, which is their number 2 pitcher. 9, 8, 7 2/3, 7, 9. 1930s, they stayed in a lot longer, and again, unless they were just getting absolutely shelled, like Rube Wahlberg did. Look at that ERA, almost 8. So we take a look at him. Yeah, he had some good games, but he also had a couple where he just got shelled and came out. But 5 or 6 earned runs, and the pitcher was staying in most of the game, which is definitely different from what we see nowadays. So there was the Philadelphia. Let's take a look at St. Louis, just to kind of get an idea of them. Hafey, as I said, 444 to lead the team. Frankie Frisch, 339. Peppermart, 338. Sparky Adams, 315. Jimmy Wilson was a full-time player, 207 only for Jimmy Wilson. And you'll notice the same thing with their pitchers. Jim Lindsay was their primary reliever. He had 15 2/3 innings in relief. But their main starters were Hallahan, Burley Grimes, Derringer, who wasn't the greatest, Syl Johnson. Those are their top 4, as we can see here. So, again, I just kind of wanted to give a little overview of some of that stuff. A little wrap-up, if you will, of the 1930s. It was very interesting. Let's go back to the main page here. There we go. So again, you can come out here to baseballmaelstrom.com. You can get the write-ups on each game and that kind of thing by clicking Best of the 30s Tournament. Overall, things that I learned, I guess, I really enjoyed the tournament aspect. I really, before I started this, I was kind of torn on whether I wanted to do a tournament or whether I wanted to do like a round-robin tournament where everybody played the same number of games. And I settled on a tournament because I think there's just more drama involved. It's almost like a postseason, if you will. And so the games just have more at stake, I felt like. Whereas in a round-robin, halfway through, you could have teams that are basically statistically eliminated. And so, or even a couple of teams that are eliminated kind of facing off against each other, and the game really isn't too exciting in and of itself, just because of, the teams are already statistically out of it by then. Whereas in a tournament, every game has some value to it. The downside being that you can't really, as I said, you can't compare stats team to team. You can compare the rate stats, but not the counting stats team to team. But now that I have one tournament done, the next tournament, when it finishes, I'll be able to compare some of the top teams because they'll have similar number of games played. So that's kind of what I'm looking forward to. If you are interested to know what the next tournament's going to be. It's going to be the best of the 1990s, and I'm already gearing up for that one. So we're going to have 5 American and 5 National League teams from the 1990s. Of course, I'd imagine the style of play is going to be quite a bit different, obviously, because of the different eras. So pitchers aren't going to be getting quite as many complete games, though even in the 90s, you still had a decent number of complete games by starting pitchers. So, it's only in the last decade or so that teams really, I feel like the pendulum has really swung the other way with complete games, and now almost no pitcher gets a complete game. But in the 90s, you still had the top pitchers getting some complete games in there, so I'd imagine we'll still see some of that. But I'm really looking forward to it. The 90s was, I graduated high school in 91, so this is going to be all teams and players that I'm more familiar with. I did enjoy the 30s just for learning about players I had no idea of. I tried to keep the lineups fairly historical, though I did use a DH for each team, which I know is not historical, but other than that, the lineups are fairly historical, and I plan to do that with the 90s as well. The other thing with the 90s is the rosters were so much, they used so many more players over the course of a season. Some of these 1930s teams, I think, I want to say the Pirates maybe, they barely used, 25 men over the course of a full season. Can't remember exactly how many they had on the total season roster, but it was not as many as you would think. Of course, when you have pitchers completing most of the games, you don't need a deep pitching staff as much. But definitely in the 90s, the rosters are they use way more players. But I'm going to cut them down to like a 26-man roster to make things more manageable. And that's what I'm kind of playing next. But I just want to kind of give a brief update, as I said. I do have another project with Payoff Pitch Baseball, this Payoff Pitch Pops Season 2 that's going on right now. And so if you're curious about that, you can check that out as well. That has its own stats and schedule, and it's on the main page here. And I'm going to be adding the legends or busts. I'm going to be adding a couple of those cards into these teams because one of the downsides of the league is the pitching staffs aren't quite large enough, or as large as I'd like them to be. So I'll probably add some legends or busts to the pitching staffs to kind of make them a little bit more robust. But that will be for a topic for another video. Thank you so much for watching this. If you're curious about anything, send me a message, leave me a comment, or head over to baseballmaelstrom.com and you can check out all the stats yourself. But I welcome feedback. That's where we will leave things. Thank you so much for watching, and until next time, have a great evening.